Ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to believe that against the backdrop of even the New York Times noticing that the food supply chain is completely crumbling right now, that the life support system of civilization is shutting down, and the UN is also warning of a food crisis, of impending global food shortages due to supply chain disruptions. Even against that backdrop, and with Italy deploying armed police to keep the peace at supermarkets where food riots were breaking out, people were getting quite aggressive because they couldn't afford food. They can't even feed their family. And yet, even against all of these things going on, we see governments have already done this, have made it illegal to purchase seeds so that you can start growing your own food. This picture from Vermont. But they're not alone. And we need to talk about that. I'm Christian, and this is the Ice Age Farmer channel. And it's true that Vermont has literally criminalized the act of selling seeds. They're called non-essential items, and Walmart and Target have all had to shut down their garden centers. Reading down here, the items cannot be sold in person. Among them include home and garden supplies. And the agency went so far as to specify that showrooms and garden sections of these home improvement centers, like Home Depot or whatnot, should be closed down unless there is a life-threatening emergency. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest that there is a life-threatening emergency. That's what it means when the UN and governments are putting out messages about impending global food shortages and the inability for us to feed our families. This is a life-threatening emergency. That's why I've been recommending you start growing your own food. And so it makes me mad when a government stands in the way of your ability to do that. And that's why I lead with that story. As I said, they're not alone. Maryland's regulations also specify that you're not allowed to buy gardening supplies or even painting, who cares, during this stay-at-home order. They're just not considered essential. Can you buy plants and seeds to garden at home? County officials specify, no, you cannot. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the United States. In fact, some other places have it even worse. Canada neglected to even add agriculture, the entire industry, to its list of essential practices. It's just unbelievable. Apparently, that's not critical infrastructure. We don't need food, Canada announces. And so the entire sector is warning food prices are going to spike and we'll probably have food shortages unless you let us grow food, which is what agriculture means. Canada needs to figure that out. Worse yet, Ontario got word that they had specified community gardens needed to be shut down right now. That was part of all outdoor recreational activities that have been closed down, including, quote, outdoor community gardens. These are the kinds of projects that should be flourishing right now. There's a sudden interest in growing food and in making ourselves more self-sufficient and growing local food, but that is being squashed out by these governments and their lockdown orders. Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest, as I said, that this is a life-threatening situation and that we must push back against this complete invasion of our ability to grow food. That is a case where we need to be raising all sorts of issues to whatever city council, whatever level of government you have access to, needs to be hearing about that quite loudly, and you need to be gaining support for that. And then even as you do that, I think it's already the case where this is just something where civil disobedience is necessary. No one can tell you that you can't grow food for your family. That crosses the line. Food waste across the world is reflecting this as well due to other shutdowns. We see from BBC that millions of plants are being thrown away due to the closure of 2,000 garden centers and nurseries. This is not the first time I've talked about nurseries shutting down, but it's not just gardens, it's not just farms and growing food, it's also livestock and animals. I wanted to share this note from Top Knot, who's a supporter of this channel and is also a rancher in Michigan, where he raises beef and other things. And according to him, the two largest packing companies in our region have been shut down, and there is nowhere for producers to take animals to be processed for meat. We're not sure what to do. It sounds like we're going to have to butcher animals ourselves if we actually want to go forward. This has killed the cattle market in Michigan, and this is happening all over. And I've seen lots of examples of this and heard from plenty of other folks, other ranchers that are experiencing the same thing.
Sharply lower on cattle markets, all of them. Cows and bulls, fat cattle, calves, yearlings, anything. Box beef cutout values, everything's sharply lower. And I'll tell you what, this coronavirus pandemic is going to break a lot more people than it kills.
Twitter is full of reports of this exact same thing going on. Plus, just look at the cattle prices. You can see it there in the market as well. We expect things to get much worse yet, and should probably sell the cows for whatever I can get them, because it's going to get even worse. It's going to get even harder to unload these cattle. I also wanted to, so that's one thing. And then separately, I also wanted to call out that he says, I'm now trying to figure out what to do. I've poured my life into these cows, and I don't want that to go to waste. And I'm probably going to get out of the cattle business and switch to sheep, because this is ridiculous, because there's no market anymore. So not only, ladies and gentlemen, is there an immediate effect that there is no beef being processed right now, and without beef processors, there are no hamburgers in the stores, but so too then is there a second effect where people are getting out. They're either being broken and going bankrupt, or if they're able to survive this amazing financial and economic storm that we are enduring, we're just starting to see it now, then they just won't work on beef anymore, because it's shut down. It's being treated terribly, and that is wholly aligned with the agenda to shut down all meat production and end animal agriculture, in their own words, and force people onto the lab-grown meat that they've been fantasizing about for years. So please spread this word. This is the plight of many ranchers and farmers across the nation and globally, in fact. But we see, like I said, we see this on Twitter being discussed quite a bit, and then also from the Packers side. We see Tyson was slowing down by 15% their rate on the assembly line, because they have to distance out their people for social distancing, social isolation. We've already covered that there are many other meat processors and packers shutting down right now, both in the U.S. and abroad. Here's yet another one reported just the other day. And that means that all of these packers are either shut down or they're backing up because they're not able to process. And this is the reason why there's no market. There's no place for these ranchers to take their meat. All of this points to the global protein shortage worsening, intensifying, and an inability to get meat in the future. So stock up now. And again, Bloomberg is sort of pushing this as well. Uproar among workers supplying the world's meat is spreading, which is probably going to encourage it even more with this article. But it's not just the meat. We're also seeing egg shortages. The U.S. media is blaming, if you can believe it, they're actually blaming stress baking, because people are stuck at home, and so they're baking cakes to make themselves feel better, and that has put an undue amount of stress on our egg supply chain. But whatever the case may be, in the UK, they're actually saying that they have plenty of eggs, but they're rotting. Let me zoom in. But they're rotting in their storehouses because, quote, we have an unanticipated egg carton shortage, and that's keeping us from getting eggs into stores. Apparently, quote, the entirety of Europe is supplied by just 3 egg carton manufacturers. None are in Britain, and the one in Denmark is closed for the next 20 days. And so we've got warehouses full of eggs and lots of people who want to buy them, but we can't get those two connected. We can't get these things to market. And this is just a very interesting and specific case study in this failure of logistics, where we've got product and we've got we've got demand for it, but logistics have failed. The supply chain itself, not the product even, the supply chain has been dismantled. And there are other cases where regulations are still being enforced that they should just be thrown away at this point. LA officials are shutting down restaurants who, because no one is coming to eat at their restaurants, had taken to this enterprising idea of just putting their produce out on the street and selling it like a market. Well, that's no good. If you live in Los Angeles, you can't sell food without a permit, so these restaurants were promptly shut down by the Department of Health, coming through and saying, no, you're going to have to let this food go to waste. And that is just sad. And as I said, particularly when we're seeing violence already break out, unrest across Latin America and even in Italy, where the police have been stationed there, armed guards at supermarkets to keep violence from breaking out. And this is only a few days after the food banks had run dry. So Italy is only, just as with the spread of the virus, Italy is only a few days ahead of the United States in its timeline. And you can see this happening now as New York City has reported that there's a huge demand, a surge for food banks. And we saw from last time that Chicago has already had a third of their food banks shut down because they're oversubscribed, they're out of food, and so they're shutting down. They can't staff them anymore either. New York food banks are being inundated with newcomers deprived of income since the near total halt of business in the U.S. economic capital. And like I said, we're only beginning to get an initial appreciation for how wholly the U.S. economy, the global economy, has been thrown off the rails, just stopped altogether. They are just shutting down the system. And there will be no return to normalcy, no return to the systems we had before. Some of these numbers, unemployment may hit 32%, according to the Fed, with 47 million people losing their jobs. There's no returning from that. And as I said, this is flowing into then a demand for food from the food banks, and ultimately, like Italy and Latin America, will necessarily result in people who can't afford to feed their family anymore, spilling out onto the streets and getting upset and probably getting violent. So it's just a matter of time before the U.S. cities erupt in violence, unless there's a drastic change in events. That's just the vector we're on. That's just the trajectory here. And there's other sad stories about food being wasted for bad reasons. Just as the meat supply lines, processors, have been shutting down or greatly decelerating, so too is this the case with dairy. This was reported that many dairy farmers were forced to dump thousands and thousands of gallons of milk, which is this guy's watching his livelihood drain down the drain right there. It's just one of the saddest pictures you're ever going to see. India as well is being affected by some of these things. The lockdown there has fallen right in the middle of harvest season for teas. And so from this article, quote, "The lockdown was inevitable. We had no other option to prevent the spread of this disease. But the tea production is going to be hit hard, and this will lead to a complete collapse of India's tea industry, the biggest tea industry in the world. It will take time to bring these bushes back to production. Again, you cannot recover from these situations overnight, especially when it's talking about crops and food production. It takes a lot of investment and time to get these systems stood back up. So while you can print more money, you can't print food. And another very telling sign and a concerning sign that comes out of India right now is that their oil refineries are shutting down. They're literally running now at 50% of their capacity. It's just like the dairy, just like the meat packers, because they can't get enough seeds, oil seeds, to turn into oil at these refineries. Zoom in here. Oil refineries across India have reduced their capacity to 50 to 40% due to inavailability of raw materials, because we can't get them in the supply chain failures of coronavirus. Now again, all of this is playing out against the grand solar minimum. It's just worth calling out and reminding ourselves that the food shortages we're seeing started due to immense crop losses, because we're in such a deep minimum of solar activity right now, and we're still there. There have been a couple initial playful sunspots from solar cycle 25, but still that's going to take time to start to start stabilizing our growing seasons. And just as if to prove that point, this morning was one of the coldest April mornings on record across the Balkan, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, and northeast Italy, where they're still struggling with the virus, received terrible frost. It was down to -5 degrees Celsius, which, given that these vineyards and fruit plantations have already fruited, causes incredible amounts of loss, up to 100%, so complete loss in lots of vineyards and fruit plantations. And then, this answers the question, is our food supply under threat right now? Absolutely. And you must start growing your own food. And if you can't get seeds from your corner hardware store, then there are plenty of heirloom seed providers online. You can get to True Leaf Market at iceagefarmer.com/trueleaf. But if you don't get them there, get them somewhere and start up your garden and get plenty of them. Get a few years worth in case you have a bad year this year, or in case, as is happening everywhere right now, your neighbors are suddenly interested in growing their own food. Maybe you can start some things for them. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been focusing on potatoes and squash, and especially keeping the winter squash. I opened up a squash today because I needed the seeds from it, but it was great to see that this was actually one of the Hopi white squash, that the variety that I got from rareseeds.com a couple years ago now. And that squash I grew last year, and it has kept an entire year right now. And I fried it up tonight. It was delicious. And the seeds, I'm going to start up the next season of these guys with those seeds, and they're going to do even better, because that's what happens when you save your seeds and grow them again where they were. They get better where you are. So you need to be growing your own food, saving your seeds. That way you won't be hitting up the hardware store for them next year anyway, and spreading the word about what's going on, because we're absolutely in a situation where that is the most important thing to do. Look at North Dakota and throughout the Midwest, they're still trying to pull out the corn from last year's harvest that was stuck under snow. So we're staring down the barrel of a no plant 2020, and we'll have to cover that in a different video. For now, please spread the word about these threats, about the government shutting down your ability to procure seeds so that you can grow your own food, about the fact that there's no processing going on of a lot of crops, and certainly of beef and pork right now, and that this is going to manifest as food shortages at a store near you real soon now. Thanks for watching, folks. You can find my work directly, iceagefarmer.com, and you can support my work via patreon.com/iceagefarmer or on Subscribestar. Let's go build new food production methods that are resilient to governments that are overreaching, to climates that are changing, and get that done and spread the word with our communities. Thanks for watching, folks. Be well.